David had lived in his apartment for 3 years before he noticed it. It started subtly, in the way unsettling things often do. Just a feeling at first. A sense of being watched, of something not quite right in the shadows beyond his window. He brushed it off. City living did that to people. The mind played tricks when the lights outside flickered, when the wind howled through the alleyways, when exhaustion blurred the line between reality and paranoia. But it didn't stop. Every night, at precisely the same time, he felt it again, that prickling sensation crawling up his spine, urging him to turn around. And then, one evening, he finally did. His apartment was on the 7th floor, high enough that the only things outside his window should have been the distant glow of city lights and the occasional shadow of a bird passing through. But standing there, in the dim reflection of his window, was a figure. David froze. It wasn't just a trick of the light. The silhouette was distinct, tall, unmoving, watching. His breath hitched as he turned fully toward the window. But when he stepped closer, the figure was gone. Only the endless sprawl of the city stared back at him. He told himself it was nothing, that maybe he had been seeing his own reflection strangely, distorted by the glass. He laughed, though it was hollow, and turned back to his work. The next night it was there again. This time, he kept his eyes locked on the reflection, his pulse hammering in his ears. The figure stood motionless. It wasn't his own shape. This was something else. The longer he stared, the more certain he became. Heart pounding, he spun around. Nothing. Just the cold glass, the world beyond, and the quiet hum of his apartment. He swallowed, trying to shake the unease. But when he turned back to his computer, he couldn't focus. It continued every night. No matter how late he stayed up, how suddenly he turned to catch it off guard, the figure was always there, always waiting. It never moved, never revealed itself, just stared. Sleep became difficult. He started dreading the nighttime, dreading the moment he'd catch the faint reflection in the glass. The nights dragged on, each one a battle against his own fear. Then, after weeks of torment, David decided to test something. That night he closed his blinds before the figure could appear. He felt ridiculous as he did it, like a child hiding from monsters under the bed. But the moment they were shut, a strange relief washed over him. He exhaled for what felt like the first time in days and settled into bed. Hours passed in restless silence, and then, deep in the night, he woke with a start. His room was dark, but something was different. A heaviness hung in the air, thick and suffocating. His skin prickled with the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Slowly, his eyes adjusted to the shadows, and that was when he saw it. Through the tiny gap between the blinds, barely visible, an eye, wide, unblinking, looking in. David didn't sleep that night. The moment he saw the eye staring through the blinds, his body locked in place. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Just a single unblinking eye fixed on him from outside his 7th floor apartment. He wanted to look away, to close his eyes, to pretend it wasn't there, but he couldn't. Minutes stretched into eternity before he finally gathered the courage to move. He forced himself to sit up, to reach toward the blinds with trembling fingers. A quick yank, and they snapped shut completely, sealing him away from whatever was on the other side. But that didn't stop the feeling. The weight of its stare pressed against him, even through the fabric. He knew it was still there, watching. Morning came sluggishly. He had spent the entire night sitting upright, listening. He expected a knock, a whisper, a tap against the glass. But nothing came. When the sun finally rose, painting the room in pale morning light, he dared to check. Slowly, carefully, he pulled the blinds open. There was nothing there. No figure, no eye, no trace of anything at all. Just the city below, normal as ever. David told himself it was exhaustion, stress, maybe a lingering nightmare bleeding into his waking mind. But deep down, he didn't believe that, and the figure didn't stop. The next night it was there again, waiting, watching. David tried everything. He turned off all the lights before the usual time, hoping it wouldn't appear if it couldn't see him. But when he glanced at the window, the figure stood in the darkness, barely illuminated by the distant street lights. He moved to the other side of the room, avoiding his reflection altogether. But the weight of its gaze still reached him, crawling over his skin like invisible fingers. He started keeping the blinds shut permanently. It didn't matter. He could feel it there, even with the barrier between them. The sensation of being watched never left. Days blurred together. The paranoia ate away at him. He stopped going to work, stopped answering calls. His world shrank to the confines of his apartment. And still, the figure remained. Then, on the 5th night of keeping the blinds shut, he made a mistake. He had convinced himself that maybe, just maybe, it had given up. That if he could go 5 nights without looking, it would leave. He was wrong. That night, as he paced his apartment, running his hands through his hair in exhaustion, he stopped by the window. His fingers twitched. A single glance, he thought, just to confirm. His hand moved on its own. Before he could stop himself, he pulled the blinds open. The figure was closer. It wasn't just a vague shape in the distance anymore. It was right against the glass. A dark, hollow face. Pale skin stretched too tightly over sharp bones. Deep, empty eyes that reflected nothing. Its mouth was slightly parted, as if it had just taken a breath. David stumbled back, his stomach twisting in horror. He wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stare. But his body wouldn't cooperate. Then, for the first time, the figure moved. A slow, deliberate tilt of the head. A silent acknowledgement. David slammed the blinds shut and didn't open them again. For hours. When he finally did, the figure was gone. The next day, he made a decision. He had to leave. He packed a suitcase without hesitation. It didn't matter where he went. Anywhere was better than here. By nightfall, he had moved to a new apartment. It was across town, on the 10th floor of a completely different building. He felt relief for the first time in weeks. He hadn't seen the figure since arriving. The air was lighter. The suffocating presence was gone. That night he slept for the first time in days. But as the hours passed, something woke him. A pressure, a knowing. He sat up in bed, breath shallow. Slowly he turned toward the window. The blinds were open, and outside, against the glass, the figure was waiting. David's heart hammered in his chest. The figure was no longer outside the window. This time, it was inside. It was standing just behind the glass, pressing its face against the cool surface. For a moment, he thought it was an illusion, the remnants of his mind playing tricks. But no, the pale, grotesque face of the figure was unmistakable. The way the skin seemed to stretch unnaturally tight over its features. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the light of the city streets below. It was so close now that David could make out the smallest details. The jagged edges of its lips, the deep cracks in its cheeks. And still, it didn't move. Frozen in terror, David couldn't look away. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to escape, but his body refused to obey. He stood paralyzed, locked in place, unable to comprehend the nightmare unfolding in front of him. And then, as if sensing his thoughts, the figure moved. Its hand slid up to the glass, long fingers reaching for him. It wasn't a sudden movement. It wasn't quick or aggressive. It was deliberate, slow, and far too controlled. The fingers scraped against the surface, nails dragging across the glass with a sound that made David's teeth ache. In the reflection, David saw himself, pale, wide-eyed, trembling, and the figure in the background looming over him. But as he stared at the reflection, something changed. He no longer saw himself as he had before. His face twisted and distorted, just as the figures had. It was as if the glass itself had become a portal, a mirror into something else entirely. David's mouth went dry. He blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of it all. His reflection was fading. Or was it the figure's face that was becoming clearer? Suddenly, the room grew colder. He could see his breath misting in the air. The warmth of the apartment seemed to drain away, leaving behind only an unsettling chill. The figure's face was closer now, its eyes impossibly large, dark, and unblinking. David stumbled backward, eyes still locked on the glass. The figure's hand remained on the window, but now it pressed harder as though trying to break through. David's mind raced. He had to get out. He had to leave, to escape, to break free from this nightmare. But where could he go? Every direction felt like a trap, every exit a dead end. He had already run once, moved to a different apartment, but it hadn't worked. The figure had followed him. It was as if it had always been here, waiting for him to notice. He backed away, his legs trembling, and bumped into the desk. His fingers fumbled for his phone, but it slipped from his grasp and fell to the floor with a dull thud. The ringing of his heart was the only sound in the room now, drowning out the world beyond the window. A sudden thought struck him like a jolt of electricity. What if it wasn't just the figure that had followed him? What if it had never left him at all? He looked around, his breath coming faster now. The apartment felt different somehow. The walls seemed to close in, the edges of the room blurring. The glass, the figure. It wasn't just outside. It was inside his mind. David's fingers shook as he reached for the light switch, flipping it on. The harsh, artificial light filled the room, casting deep shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally across the floor. He turned back to the window. The figure was gone, but it wasn't gone. It was there, inside the reflection. The reflection in the window wasn't just his own. It was the figure's too. And there, standing in the corner of the room, was its shadow stretching taller than it should. It was as though the figure had always been with him, hidden in the corners of his mind, always watching, always waiting. He stumbled backward, the reality of the situation hitting him with full force. This wasn't just an entity from outside. This wasn't just a haunting of the physical world. It was something far worse, something that had attached itself to him, following him from place to place, waiting for him to break. David collapsed to the floor, his breathing shallow, his chest tight with panic. The world around him seemed to twist and distort. The lights flickered. His body trembled, not from the cold, but from the overwhelming terror that consumed him. He couldn't tell what was real anymore. The figure wasn't just a shadow on the glass. It was a part of him. He realized then what had been happening. The figure hadn't been chasing him. It had been growing, feeding on his fear, his isolation, his desperation. It had always been inside him, waiting for the moment when he would finally understand. His reflection in the window twisted one final time, and as he stared into it, he saw not just the figure, but his own face, contorted, pale, distorted. The figure was him, and he was the figure.